So, good afternoon. Great to be here again. And let's dive into the world of music and maybe a little bit architecture as well. Does anyone know these three nice gentlemen? Who is that? Okay. So the right one you already know? Someone else? No, okay, so they have something in common. Obviously, they are all conductors. And they are all, or have been conductors of the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra. And so what I found out is quite fascinating. They all had the same job as principal conductor in that orchestra. So in the same orchestra, really the same task. And I mean, such orchestras don't reinvent themselves all the time. So, but what I found out is that they all had a very different style, and therefore I want to share with you how they have been described. Not by me, but by someone else. He was conductor in the 1950 until 1990. So while all authorities were wavering, here was someone establishing an autocratically constituted musical empire based on an outstanding skill in a profession whose hallmark is authority and leadership of a community. No one should ever see him weak. The image of a daredevil sailor, racer, pilot, skier, or climber should make up the image. So this is how they describe Herbert von Karajan. And when you Google for him, you will find pictures like him on a sailing boat and standing in the storm. So this is really like how he wanted to be perceived. And he was really this, how you imagine a conductor in front of an orchestra. And then there's another one. This is Claudio Abbado. He followed Herbert von Karajan until 2002. And he was described like that. Wherever he went, he immediately created an atmosphere of friendly relaxation and sensitive listening. Authoritarian gestures have been alien to him. He broke with a long tradition of the omniscient ruler at the conductor stand that imperiously showing his orchestra the way. So, and this is for me like a completely different style, right? So I didn't know that conductors like that exist. And then there's the third one, Sir Simon Rattle. That's the name, yes. He's no longer, so until 2018, he was the principal conductor. And this is from an interview about when he left the orchestra. What also makes a conductor a good conductor is very high social skills. When he conducts, he has a charisma, an aura, his strong energy that he radiates, and the power that he has to animate an orchestra when he conducts, which means that he has also someone who allows himself to be enriched by others. So when you see all the three descriptions, I asked myself, so should an architect be in an agile environment a conductor that is standing in front of all the others, telling them their vision, not of the symphony, but maybe of the architecture, directing them to make happen what he imagined. And usually, if you imagine someone like that, so you also envision them sitting in an ivory tower. Who has heard of architects sitting in an ivory tower? Yes, so it's at least half of the room, maybe even more. And this ivory tower was also the reason why I never wanted to be an architect. It was like, oh no, I don't want to be that person. Yeah, I was proven wrong that, so because I became an architect some years later. But because of that, I thought a lot what means being an architect for me and how I self-lived the role a little bit. And for me, the important thing is that architect is not equal architect. It's not that there is this one role description of architects in whatever, software development, IT, whatever you want to name it. So the question is now, what does it mean for me? And I think it's not only different because of the different humans, but also of the different roles. And I want to give you a little bit of the background where I'm from so that you maybe understand it better, because I'm quite sure that there are environments which I've never been where you have a completely different need of architects or even more definitions. My current context is I'm working at Breuninger, which is, who knows Breuninger? Oh, it's even half of the room. So most of you will not be from Berlin or Hamburg then who raised the hand, because it's coming from Stuttgart. It's a retailer, 140 years old, a multi-channel department store in the premium luxury segment. So I'm already working there for 2 years. Before that, I was also 4 years in an agile e-commerce environment. And we are focusing on fashion, beauty, home and living. And we have like 13 stores in Germany and Luxembourg one. And we are coming to Hamburg in 2024. So everyone who doesn't know us yet, maybe you know us afterwards. We also have a huge online shop, which was initially in German-speaking countries like Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. And now we are also, since last year, in 6 more European countries. And yeah, so we are growing, therefore having a big distribution center and the oldest customer loyalty card in Germany. And to give you a little bit more background about our IT infrastructure, because it might help to understand what architects we have. We have the approach of having best of breed approaches, so not only one big SAP, Oracle, whatever. So it's mostly buy solutions. But the closer the solution comes to the customers, like the online shop, the app, things that enable our customer service or the people that are working in the stores, we build the software our own because we want to have the best customer experience. So I think a lot of companies decide for that. And yeah, so we have a huge in-house development team for everything around the customer. And for sure, some teams that are having managing the buy solutions, for example, for logistics, for the ERP system, and so on. Exactly. So, but what I believe in that, because of the different cases, we need we have different architectural tasks. It's not all the same. You don't need that one person who can take over that all. And to explain a little bit what roles we have or what tasks we have, I tried to come up with a small figure which has 2 dimensions, right? We are technical people, so graphs are always good. So one dimension is, are you more working on technical tasks or are you working more on business tasks? That doesn't mean that they both should not go in together, right? But the question is, what is your focus? What is your main skill? What is what you like to do? So this is the one dimension. Because I think not everyone can do everything all the time. And the other dimension is like, how broad is the scope you're working on? So we have architectural tasks which are more focusing on the overall enterprise, on all the stuff that we have. And we have architectural tasks that are focusing on a vertical level, like usually the smallest thing that we have is one team, one application, something like that. So some people are more focusing on right upper corner, on the left corner, whatever. And I try to cluster them. And what I see first is, for example, something like enterprise architecture. Usually that is much more on a business level. So we don't, on a very broad scope level, you don't focus on how you exactly will build and put everything together, but you focus on, okay, I have an ERP system, I have an online shop, I have a logistics system, so how did they all fit together? And if I need to replace something or need to add something, which plays with what? So this is really on a business level, what do business needs we have? The next part that we have is the domain architecture. This is a little bit smaller from the scope, so a domain is for us usually a group of solutions or teams that have something in common, which have a lot of contextual relationships. So for example, certain teams inside the shop that are handling the checkout, the payment, and so on. So you can assume that this all belongs easily together. So they are focusing still on the business stuff, but they are getting a little bit closer also to the architecture of one application or solution, or like a group of solutions. So they are not on the how do you implement everything level already, but a little bit closer to which interfaces we need, maybe what technologies in general might be there, or what applications exactly we buy. The next part is the task of software architecture, which is then on a smaller scope level, but it contains everything from business up to technical questions. This is what I imagine what a agile team, a development team should own, right? This is something where the team decides, they maybe know what to build, they understand it, everything, and they know how to translate it best into the real technical solution. So this is like very broad range on the one axis, but therefore you don't care for the whole enterprise, but you care about your environment. So this is really something that goes with a team. This is not something an architect that is somewhere sitting in the ivory tower should own. This is task of the team. And how a team is organized, that is something the team needs to decide. Do you have one senior developer who's taking more care? Do you have a group of team that they all do that together? You have different people who focus on different aspects of architecture. This is something that is part of the team decision. So we have now something like a nice line, but there's something still missing that we have in our company. And this is what we call platform architecture. Some people might also call it technical architecture. This is something where we decide how we want to build systems in general. So it's not like how this specific team will implement their stuff and which library they will use. But for example, how do we want to integrate our systems? On which cloud platform is our system running? Is it Azure? Is it Google? I will not let every team decide to run on another cloud provider, right? So this doesn't seem to be feasible for a company. So this is something where we have to decide on macro architectural questions, on guidelines that the teams in a certain platform have to adhere to. So it can also be that you have multiple platforms. So for example, you can have a platform for the online shop, and maybe if you have something else where you develop your own stuff, then it could be a different platform which has different needs, which has different guidelines. And the platform architecture is not there's this one platform architecture guy, but we have specified it now in different areas. So for example, we have a platform architect for frontend. This is a very specific thing, taking care about how do we want to do front-end integration, how do we want to go forward, what are the metrics that we are interested in, for example. We have someone who's more on the infrastructure level. We have someone who's more in the area of data and machine learning operations. So these are all very technical specific things. So they don't focus on all the business questions in a certain area, but how we want to build things. I think what they all have in common, that they use abstraction as their superpower. So usually an area is ignoring the details of the other stuff. The platform architects ignoring about what exactly the business needs are, and the enterprise architects don't care too much about how everything is tied together. So this is like how we have it at the moment. I don't know if you find something which is outside that pattern. I would be very much interested if you can tell me afterwards if you have a completely different setup or what is missing. So I think everyone can find their comfort zone of an architect. And for me, it's also something that helps to discuss like what is your place to be. So there's not this one definition of architect. For me, that part still belongs to the team, but all the other part, if you don't take care about that in a company, I think that company will have a mess of IT landscape at one point. If you let all the teams do what they want, it's fine. They will build very good solutions, but like, what is the company strategy things, for example, and how and who's solving the question of we have something new, we want to build something new, which team takes it over? These are the questions that we are solving more on the right-hand side. So I will now bring up some elements that help, in my opinion, me to be a happy architect at least. So the first thing is to decide what is really my type of architecture, what do I want to focus on. This can change over time, but for a certain time it helps to be focusing on one thing, because otherwise you're doing everything but not everything in a good way. The next thing is that we as architects need to talk to very different people. You sometimes talk to a developer, you sometimes talk to POs, you talk to people maybe in the management, whatever it takes, or to the business, because you want to understand it. And that means that we need to speak different languages, but it also means that we need to bring other people to collaborate with me, to understand what their needs are and so on, and to achieve something that you want to achieve. And in the past, I had roles like I was a developer first, I switched to PO, then I became somehow an architect. And 1 year ago, I had the chance to switch into management. And therefore, I started, like, my heart is still being an architect somehow, but I started to dig also deeper into leadership topics. And there's one thing that I really liked, and which I think helps a lot if you also understand it as an architect, because architecture is always also something like a lateral leadership, at least, because you need to people to collaborate. You can, of course, you can sit in your ivory tower if you want to and just say, do that. Usually it will not bring the result that you want. And this is maybe the explanation why. Because there are different types of power. Power in Germany is something which you usually don't want to talk about. But in a general concept, it's something that helps you to achieve things and bring other people to do the things in a positive way that you want to achieve. And the most common type of power is role power. This is why you will do something because someone has a badge on their step. If a policeman comes to you and say, get out of your car, I assume most, at least of you, will do that because he has the role that he can tell you. If there is some security guy who tells you, no, you cannot enter that door, maybe you take the other one. This is what happens if architects say things because of their role and want to bring people to do something. These are people who are sitting in the ivory tower. You can do that, it will work, but it will not be sustainable. And usually the people who do things just because of someone has role power will not be the happy people over time. The next thing is expertise power. It's something that because you are good in something, you are an expert in a field, people know that you are good in front end, you are good in security, you are good in whatever. They know it and they will ask you maybe even for help, or if you say, this is not a good idea, many people will listen to you because they know that you're an expert in your field. This is something that I think is quite common in IT, because in a team, usually they have someone who has experience in that. So this is like, people will trust each other, but you need to know that there's an expert. This is working much better than role power, but it's not the maybe most sustainable one. The most sustainable one is relationship. This is if your friend tells you, this is a very bad idea, I think you should not do that, it's most reasonable that you will follow, because you trust that this person doesn't want to harm you and knows maybe things that you don't know. So it can be a mixture of all the different powers, but relationship power is because I trust another person, I know that person, I like that person maybe. This is something why people will then even not just do what you want, but maybe because they will follow you. So if you can establish relationships to people, it will be much easier to achieve things. This is not only true for architects or managers, but this is true for everyone, because most of us need to collaborate with other people. So what my learning is, if you are an architect that offers guidance, that is helpful, that has an open ear, that talks to people not only if you want something from them, but whenever you want, then this is a good thing. And what also is for every person, I think self-reflection helps, and maybe also understanding the other people. And so maybe that helps you also to keep an eye on why you are doing something which someone else asks you for. So next to focus, you should be aware of what powers you have. And usually when you want to have power, for me, that means you also should take over responsibility, because for me the worst case what I ever heard about an architect is he said, yeah, I'm the architect, but I'm not responsible for anything, but I tell the people what to do. And I was like, I think that's not a good idea if you have someone who tells what should happen but doesn't feel responsible for it, because like where should that end? Like it went wrong, yeah, it's not my fault, it's they did it wrong, right? So this is something for me, if you want to have power and if you want to decide things, then also be responsible for that thing. The next part is that maybe helps you to become a better or a happy architect, not maybe a better one, is not to do the job by your own. So I think a lot of these different architectural tasks can just do the task on their own. But what happens with everything outside the software architecture in our company is right now happening in an architecture team. I was last week on a conference about Agile and architecture, and there someone said, oh, if you have an architecture team, that's the start of the end, and it's all the evil, like you should not have an architecture team. That's really, really, really bad. Architecture only belongs to the teams. And I was like, yeah, but what is with all the rest of the graph, right? And this is something that we have currently in our architecture team, where people who are focusing on enterprise architecture, people who are focusing on platform architecture are in. Sometimes it can be really challenging because they are on so different levels or on so different focus points that they speak really quite different languages. But what I learned over the time being part of that team was the discussion is really challenging, and sometimes really like they don't even understand what they are talking about. But at the end, usually something good came out. So I really embrace the discussion. We take the time for that because people with a different focus on architecture, they also have a different point of view on a certain topic, and they will ask questions, maybe questions you don't even think about because you're so much deep into your topic. So right now, for me, it's the right feeling to have this architecture team. I don't know if it will be forever like that, if the team is too big, or if we figure out, oh, we need to split it, or whatever happens. But at the moment, that is for me something that's working out. But also, there is the risk that we build an even bigger ivory tower, right? So then you have a group of people sitting in the ivory tower. This is something I don't want to have, but hopefully we can achieve it. And then you could ask, a team is usually someone that have a common goal, and I think the goal of that team is to have really sustainable architecture, something that is future proven, and that we find the right balance, because you can always aim for the ideal architecture that is super great and you need 10 years to build it, or you find the right balance between ideal solutions and pragmatic solutions. And this also means that you need to give and find the balance between freedom in certain areas. So for example, the team can decide quite a lot of things, but there's also something where you need to take care that things are in a certain range, and you need to find that freedom autonomy thing versus equality, efficiency, and so on. So the third part for me is being in part of a team helps, talking to others about your thoughts, because otherwise it can be really, really lonely. So for me means architects should, sometimes maybe they need to be conductors, but then maybe more in a friendly style, so not in the Karajan way of doing it. But also they need to be band members. Sometimes they need to be band members because they are part of a development team. Sometimes they need to be band member inside an architecture team. And sometimes they also need to be just band member in the overall enterprise, because if there's a team who has questions or we need to work with different teams, it's not that this is the architect in the room that decides everything. Sometimes that might be necessary as an escalation way. We can't agree on something, but usually it's something we find out together where we want to go. So, and the last part is for me to make the magical triangle perfect, is that I can just tell you, do what you love. So figure out if architecture is the right thing for you or not, and what exactly part does make you most fun, and do it with passion, because I think if you don't like what you are doing, you will not do it very perfectly, and therefore rather love it or leave it. Somehow I left it, but it doesn't mean that I loved it. So maybe I will go back to that point as well at one point. So, but that is really the last part of the triangle, is to put passion on top. And if maybe translated more into questions, is you should know what you want to work on, how you want to achieve the things that you want to achieve, with whom you want to achieve them, and at the end, why you really want to work on all that stuff. And therefore, I can just leave you with my last question, and then you can ask yours. So maybe figure out what is your style of being an architect, team member, or solving your architectural tasks. And I can also just recommend train the different ways of acting, be aware of what power you are using, how you want to be perceived, and then figure out when it's time to use which of these. That's it.